All right, so continuing on with the definitions, this next part is looking at religious classifications. For these definitions, you may use this lecture for part of the definition. I do want you to go further. As you define the terms, think of how to define them in your own words and in relationship to that concept of an ultimate power, that concept of how they are answering or how this classification helps to answer questions of ultimate concern. So I'm just going to go through and mention them quickly and almost basically, because I want to see in this part of the workbook how you can do research using a textbook, using the internet, and using your own thought and experience in the past. So monotheism. Most often we think of with monotheism one god or one goddess. In this case, I want you to think this means there's one ultimate power. Mono, singular. Now, theism, it usually is going to mean that there is going to be a deity, and this deity has an essence that lets it answer questions of ultimate concern. Polytheism, and I'll come back to henotheism in a minute, there's no ultimate power. Poly meaning many, theism, we're still looking at gods or goddesses, these types of beings. We're going to say that there's multiple gods, multiple goddesses, but there's no ultimate power. All right. And again, you're going to add to these definitions. Henotheism, there's still one ultimate power, but there's still multiple, and I'm going to go ahead and add that here, multiple divine beings, multiple gods or goddesses perhaps. Henotheism, one of these divine beings has risen to the top in such a way that they are above or beyond any others. So 2 examples here, and how we can see where it might fit more towards polytheism or henotheism or monotheism. If we look at ancient Greek, Roman pantheons, lots of gods and goddesses, and even the greatest, the strongest of the gods or goddesses were not beyond reproach. They could be injured. They could be influenced by a human being. They could be hurt by other gods and goddesses. So that really emphasizes this polytheistic view. Now, when we get to Hinduism, we're going to have a lot of discussion, or have the ability for the discussion is there to say what type of religion Hinduism is. So on one component, there are tons of gods and goddesses. There's 3 main gods. But even beyond that, there's one ultimate power, Brahman. And so we can use henotheism to describe that component. Now, with monotheism, we think, okay, most often the Western religions come to mind. But just to give a challenging thought with this, if there's multiple divine beings, we can say it's more henotheistic than monotheistic. So if there's angels, if there's demons, if there's a devil, if there is a Father, a Son, and a Holy Spirit, if there are multiple divine beings, then maybe henotheism will be more accurate than monotheism. We'll discuss this more as we move through the different world religions. All right, animism. Anything can be animated. I often will say, think about animals. And it's this idea that animals, but also plants, nature, rocks, gems, etc., is animated. It is filled with some sense of a spirit. Ancestryism, I want you to think ancestor. With ancestryism, just as a little side note here, almost every culture has some component of ancestry. In its smaller form, we could say this is the idea of telling the child, hey, don't worry, granny or grandpa or such and such is still looking over you. They're still watching over you. We could even combine this notion of ancestryism with animism, and when Spot, the puppy dog's grown up and dies, you can still say, hey, Spot is still there looking after you too. Now, in its furthest extent, ancestryism is when we say that those who have passed become the essence of the ultimate. They become the understanding of the divine, the understanding of even heaven. And so when we get to Confucianism and Taoism, the Chinese religions, will talk about that component. All right, so totemism, the thing that most people think of, a totem pole. So what is a totem pole? What do the different images, depictions mean on a totem pole? Now, as you notice, as we're going on, I'm giving you less information. I want to see you look these terms up. All right. Pantheism and monism. The main thing I want to mention to you on these two right now is that in both cases, everything is interconnected. The thing is how it's interconnected. Is it interconnected as lots of individual things? Is it connected as one thing that has its own essence? Right? Atheism. I give you the word science because, again, part of what I want you to do for these definitions is explain how the answers to questions of ultimate concern are found. And so for atheism, it's not that they don't ask the great questions, as they're sometimes called, but it's where they are finding the answers to those questions. So with atheism, we see science, logic, rationality. Beyond that, atheism is irreligious. It is not religious. But we can still see some of the traits show up there. Atheism is also atheism, no ultimate power. All right? And then I want you to notice the difference between deism and theism. And a lot of this is coming down to that approach to the questions of ultimate concern, or the role possibly of the divine being or beings in a person's life. Agnosticism is another one that we could say is irreligious. I just want to mention this one part because there's a lot of variation between pop culture and different definitions we have for agnosticism. Most simply, it is this notion, maybe there's a divine being, maybe there's not a divine being. We don't know. Key component, we cannot know. Key component, does it matter? And so think about that. It's more than just having a notion of, well, there probably is, but we don't know. No, you're getting into a different belief then. Oh, there absolutely isn't. Nope, that's more towards atheism. And so agnosticism is this little in-between area that we use it in classifying religions in part because there are components or there are specific questions of ultimate concern that we're going to encounter where the religion, the community is saying, that's not an important question. That question does not matter. We don't know the answer to that question. We cannot know the answer. All right, that wraps up this one. We have one more definitions one that's going to look at religious orientations. Religious orientations are not primarily in the textbook. They are primarily through lecture.